Good morning. Today is July 5th. Happy belated birthday, America. We are observing your birthday today. And what better way to celebrate America's birthday than talking about America?
America.
Yeah, we'll be talking about America this morning. So sit back, relax. Oh, everyone's off today, right? Because they're observing July 4th on the 5th. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow. So during your barbecue or whatever Americans do, sit back, relax. You're listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
And I'm Eugene Kim.
And today is America. No.
Today's America?
This is America.
This is America?
Yeah. This is an American podcast on America's observed birthday. So this is like a big day, huh? For us Americans?
Yep.
Yeah, I just became American a couple of years ago, so I'm not really used to the language of. So today we'll be discussing current events and more specifically current events in relation to Pride Month, which is the month of June here in America, whose birthday we are celebrating, observing today. And, we want to do this because as we read the news, we watch the news, we hear the news, I want to help us, Pastor Gene, as a church to be able to view whatever is going on in our world with a Christian worldview. So questions like, how are we to think about this or that? How are we to respond to X, Y, and Z? And most importantly, how are we to pray through X, Y, and Z? Of course, we won't be able to cover every news story from every outlet, but I think, just the ones that catch our eye, I think we should be able to talk about and dissect together. And, I was thinking, who knows, maybe we'll do this for the rest of the summer if it goes well. I'm not sure. We do have a topic list planned for the next couple months, but we're throwing a curveball here. But don't check me for a foreign substance on my hat. That was a baseball reference because the MLB is cracking down on pitchers. But that was just kind of a little comment. But first, we're going to go to a story that was posted in the New York Times. I just realized I didn't even ask you how you're doing. I didn't ask you how you celebrate July 4th.
Yeah, what are you doing today?
Today, I'm in New York City.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Today, I'm going to be in New York City because we are celebrating our anniversary today.
When is your anniversary?
July 3rd.
Wow.
Yeah. So beat America by day.
So you're 2 years married?
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. So fun. So first, we're going to go to a story. We're going to go to a story that was posted in the New York Times. There was an article titled "The Boys in Their Summer Dresses." And it was talking about the beauty of men wearing dresses this summer. And the article reads, "Those pleasures," which I believe is talking about joy of looking in urban existence, "those pleasures largely withheld over the last 16 months have returned as we venture forth from our caves. To the delighted surprise of at least one observer, a considerable number of us apparently used the time in confinement to rethink some shibboleths about who gets to wear what." I thought it was so interesting because we literally explained what shibboleth was. And here we see the word being used to talk about men wearing dresses and waning gender dress codes. This article keeps on going. They talk about A$AP Rocky, where he wears a kilt on the cover of GQ. Lil Nas X, who wears a skirt. Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny is an artist, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Bad Bunny, Kid Cudi, they're all wearing women's garbs. There's even like an interview with somebody that says they now just shop in the women's department. They quote A$AP Rocky saying, "To be able to have that comfort wearing something that's considered to be feminine, that shows masculinity to me." So, I guess reading something like this, and I don't think that this is so rare anymore. I think this is becoming more and more commonplace in a world where fashion is viewed as a way of expressing yourself. What are we to think about this? Is this wrong?
Well, yeah, of course.
Then I think people could even say that, well, why is it wrong then? Why is it wrong for a man to wear a dress? Isn't it just clothing? Aren't they just expressing themselves? Like, why is that so wrong for a man to do that? Like, what's so wrong about that?
Yeah, I mean, even the argumentation doesn't fly. It's like someone throws something in your face, and then you're like, why would you throw that? And they're like, hey, what's wrong with throwing that? So it's when people just continue to put this stuff in our faces and then say, keep on screaming, there's nothing wrong with it. So they're
Yeah.
trying to show, like, if you feel like there's something wrong with it, then something's wrong with you. So it's they're always trying to flip the script, and trying to show that, this is normal. But if it was really normal, then they wouldn't have had to write an article about it. Obviously, it's not normal. So what they're
Right.
trying to do is they're trying to normalize it, but they're doing it in such a subversive way where they're trying to normalize it by showing that it's already normalized. This is an old tactic that people have used in the past, and they're just using it. It's just so, I guess, pretty. It's ridiculous on its face. That's why people aren't accepting it for what it is. Men don't wear dresses in our society, and that has that is what has distinguished men and women for countless centuries now. And even the notion of kilts has always been different. And
Right.
so we're not Scottish. And so those are things that, wouldn't even make sense in our culture anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It reminds me of, did I mention Sue Ellen Browder's book,
No.
Subverted?
No, I don't think so.
Anyway, there's quite a few out now. But in the whole sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s, Sue Ellen Browder, this one in particular, she wrote a book recently called Subverted, but it's about these women authors who would write about how women, this is in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
how women were just being freed from their sexual oppression by working and by
Oh, I
getting
see.
jobs
Hmm.
and things like that.
Hmm.
And how having a job is so awesome. It's so great. Having this independence is really marvelous. And this is what Sue Ellen Browder was, a writer for Cosmopolitan, which was one of the more influential, if not the most influential women's magazine at the time, and still has a huge influence now. And what she had to go through was she needed to write all these stories, but there were no women. There were no
Uh-huh.
women out in the workforce en masse like they did until after World War II. But that's a different history lesson. But even then, women weren't happy to be
Hmm.
working in the outside force.
Hmm.
It wasn't something that people thought were necessary. In fact, when they did a study, most women who graduated college were happier staying at home. And when I say most, I don't have the stats with me. Maybe we could put it in when we find it in the details. But it was like more in the upwards of 80% or more. I don't know what it is, but
Hmm.
they were just happy at home. They liked having the option of getting a job if they needed to, but they like staying at home.
Okay.
So these places in Cosmo didn't have women that wanted to go outside. They liked being at home. Being a homestay mom was actually a wonderful opportunity that these women thought they could choose from if they could choose from anything.
Hmm.
Obviously, they had to write about how staying home was terrible. So this is what Sue Ellen Browder writes in her book, and there are other authors who are now coming out saying this is what they did during the whole sexual revolution and the women's movement.
Yeah.
But they had to make up stories. Basically, they just made up stories about women being really happy. And now these women at home who are maybe they think they can get a better life out there in the workforce, they're reading about these romanticized stories which are entirely false. And now they're succumbing to, just this whole notion that if you stay at home, there's somehow you're not living up to your full potential. So if you
Hmm.
raise your kids like women had been doing for thousands of years, now you're not fulfilling your destiny and your purpose in life. And not even the notion of being homestay is even looked down upon in current day society. So
Yep.
women
Yep.
staying home, raising their kids, people are like, why are you wasting so much of your potential and
Yeah.
talent? So that's how we kind of see it. And I mean, this is not a podcast on that. So I won't get too much into it. But this is what has been happening in the past. People have been doing this. And so now we see this kind of subversion in, gender fluidity. Like it's
Mhm.
somehow normal for guys to wear dresses. It's not, and it never has been. In fact, the Bible even talks about dressing properly, men as men and women as women
Yep.
in 1 Corinthians 11, which our church has gone through. But,
Mhm.
back in that society, women were noted and they were differentiated because they had a veil over their heads, which was a sign of submission, like it says in 1 Corinthians 11, and men don't. It was a disgrace for a man to put on a veil, and it was a disgrace for a woman to take off their veil because
Yeah.
that's what differentiated and distinguished the sexes back in the day. And so Paul's like saying, don't do that. Don't confuse it. That's not a good thing. And now we are, I think, way past. I think someone said that to me. I think he listens to this podcast too, but he told me over this weekend, the more I think about it and the more we study First Corinthians, I think that we're beyond where the city of Corinth was.
Mm.
We're way past their level of sinfulness.
Mm.
And I tend to agree. There are similarities that we're going through, but now we're so beyond it where we think that we want to kind of continue to, push that agenda where men wearing dresses is a normal thing. It's
Yeah.
not normal. It never has been. And the fact that we're trying to normalize it, saying, oh, this is always what it's been, and now
Mhm.
men can be more free if they can wear dresses, doesn't actually free men. Uh, it completely goes against social, biblical norms, any kind of norm that we're talking about. And we did talk about even in 1 Corinthians 6:9, what that meant toward the end. But we could review it because, the people in this podcast might not necessarily be people who listen to the sermon.
So 1 Corinthians 6:9 reads, "Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality."
Yeah, and it goes on to thieves, greedy, drunkards, revilers, right? But men who practice homosexuality is actually two Greek terms, right? I think we briefly mentioned that in this podcast, perhaps. Men who practice homosexuality is two words. It's just translated as one phrase.
Yeah.
But it's from malakos and arsenokoites, right?
Uh-huh.
And malakos and arsenokoites is it's basically in our normal everyday vernacular.
Yeah.
Yeah, malakos is literally it means the effeminate. Okay, so these are people who act like women, and so in the whole sexual partner between two men, this would be the person who would play the woman. So it would be the effeminate. It would be the person who even could dress like a woman. That's malakos. And then we have the arsenokoites, which is the one who is the other side of that partner relationship. And so I don't want to get too crass here on this podcast, but I think you could kind of get the picture.
Mm.
So these two are definitively mentioned in the Bible, saying these two things are wrong. And I know we translated it as nor men who practice homosexuality in the ESV, which is right, but they're from these two words. And I think this is something that we'll have to definitely keep in mind as, even the PCA goes through, hopefully by this time they're done because they're meeting right now as we're recording,
Yes.
which is about 4 days before this podcast gets broadcast
Yep.
or premiered. But yeah, people want to continue to change languages and definitions like orientation. That's not in the Bible.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that word orientation will change in a few years. Guaranteed. It's not going to stay. And so now it's even called same sex attraction or SSAs because people are going to continue to change definitions to suit their current need. But ultimately, it is about the difference between the effeminate and the homosexual man, right? This
Yeah.
is what the Bible clearly condemns. And this is what we want to continue to teach. And this is not out of hate or some kind of fear, like phobia.
Yeah.
This is really out of love because God is telling us the truth, and we want to share the truth because outside of the truth, there is no lasting joy. Outside of the truth, there isn't eternal salvation or happiness or even longevity, if that makes sense. This whole, appeal to the here and now, what you
Hmm.
feel right now, this moment, the sensual, these things will pass away, and then what you'll be left with is just, it's not even an empty shell. It will be judgment, it will be damnation, it will be guilt, it will be sorrow, it will be a gnashing of teeth. And these are things that are guaranteed in the word, and we want to turn people away by preaching the gospel so that we can point them to Christ and his ways.
So we know that, like you just said, homosexuality and men dressing as women, these are sins. But, I feel like people could make arguments like, tunics, long shirts, which, are kind of like dresses, or kilts, like you mentioned before in Scotland. They're worn all over the world by men in their specific cultures. And so, because they're worn by men in their cultures and it's okay, it almost seems like as if culture is the one that defines whether it's okay or not. Meaning, in Scotland, you can wear a kilt and it's not sinful. Whereas here in America, if you just wear it, then you are dressing as a woman, because you're wearing a skirt. Therefore, you are sinning. So it almost seems like either it's the culture or the geography, the location of where you are that makes something a sin. And people may think that that's pretty subjective. People might even ask, didn't Jesus wear tunics? Isn't fashion just a cultural norm that we are making? And fashion is always changing. And so, what is the harm in doing this? Like, sure, homosexuality, completely wrong, very clear in the Bible. Men dressing as women, clear in the Bible. But if dressing in quote unquote women's fashion seems to be a subjective thing, how would we answer to that?
Yeah. And so, look, even if we went into, let's say, the history of kilts, and then you knew who wore the kilts.
Yeah.
So the main Scottish people didn't wear kilts.
Not everybody.
Not everybody. It was just the Scots in the Highlands. And people, even back in the day, thought people in the Highlands were considered barbaric. And, that's something that the Scots and, they'll have to work out with their cultural and historical roots. That's not the point. I think the point is not what other cultures are doing. It's what is this culture? How does this current culture differentiate men and women? And that's what we go with. If there is, so this is what we're trying to do in our culture today. We're trying to get rid of all distinguishing markers between the sexes because we want this fluidity. There is a purpose to it. That's the agenda.
Yep.
And so it's not about, oh, this culture back then did this. Yeah, so what? We're not that culture, right?
Yeah.
We're specifically an American culture. What does that entail? Because in American culture, there has been a differentiation between how men dress and how women dress. It's always been the case since our inception and things like that. And now, I guess what you should ask, if that really is something that you're struggling with, is why do you think right now there's this huge push for men to think that it's okay to wear what's traditionally women's garb, right?
Yeah.
Why is it okay now? We could talk about other cultures too, but because this is an America episode,
It is.
we won't.
America.
But even in Korea, I heard of things where if you wanted to rise up in the ranks in the corporate world, they wanted men to get plastic surgery. Men would have to put on makeup. There's a face regimen that men have to put on now just to look presentable. And if you didn't wear makeup, like your boss could go to you and say, why are you dressed this way? Why don't you dress yourself, dress in a way that's a little better, more appealing, or like one of those boy band figures.
Yeah.
And because I am not of Korean culture, I don't understand that. As something Korean culture will have, people in the Korean society will have to figure out themselves. I don't like how boy bands dress. I don't like how they look. That's not something that to me appeals to me as something that a man does. But, in Korea, that's what they do. And so, look, I'm not here to hate on K-pop, although we could have a whole episode on that.
We actually could do a K-pop episode.
But yeah. And so so Paul is really referencing culture because in 1 Corinthians 11, because he's hearkening back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3, he's going back to what the Bible is saying. These are different roles between men and women. And because of the different roles that men and women have, the natural outward expressions also are differentiated. They look different, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what naturally happens in society when the roles are different. Now, when the roles start to become intermingled and become confused, obviously the garb is going to get confused too, because what's the difference between men and women? We did this whole complementarian episode, so I think we can, kind of move on to this now. It's because our roles are confused that our garb is confused and people can't tell the difference. And so if you're fighting, if you don't know the difference between roles, then you're going to have a real hard time fighting for garb.
Yeah.
It's just purely subjective. It's just going to be like, yeah, I mean, men just dress this way and that's it. That's the only answer you have, right?
Right.
The outward is an expression of the inward, okay? And our inward and outward, they're both dictated by God and His Word. And this is what we want to continue to follow too. So I have no problem with people who want to wear kilts. I mean, that's a Scottish culture that maybe they can discuss if they want. I'm not going to tell them, what to do and, talk about the evolution of kilts, because not every Scot wore a kilt. Remember, it was the Highlanders that wore kilts, and people thought they were barbarians for wearing them and things like that. And so that's something that they could have a huge debate on. I don't know if they do now. I think it's just widely accepted as some kind of, the whole plaid kilt is like a symbolism of Scottish pride. And so those are things that we could talk about, like tunics and things like that. But even when there were, during first century AD, tunics being worn by men and women was not the point. The point was men and women dressed differently.
I see. So it's not the clothing item itself, but it's the distinction between men and women, which we're actually now trying to blend through this new idea or this waning of gender dress codes.
Yeah. And if it wasn't such a big deal to these guys, so it's all, this is what we classically call gaslighting. So it's from, I think this from this old movie where this husband wants to make the wife kind of crazy. So he goes downstairs and turns on the gas light, tells his wife, "Why'd you turn on the gas light?" And she's like, "I didn't." And she goes up and turns it off. And then he goes and turns it on again. It's like, I thought I told you to turn off the gas light. And it's like, she's like, "I didn't." And then, that's the whole thing. That's called gaslighting. So it's like, "Why'd you do this?" And you're like, "I didn't do it." And you're like, "So why are you posting about this men wearing dresses thing?" And the whole gaslighting issue is, why? That's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's like, so why'd you have to post it if it's not a big deal?
Yeah.
And why'd you have to write stories and articles about it if it's not a big deal? And it's like, oh, no, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So that's what gaslighting is. So all these articles are basically to gaslight anybody who's remotely conservative, who wants to keep to some kind of tradition because they find value in it.
And it's interesting that you say that, because the article is filled with stories of people that are cross-dressing and just the freedom or the happiness that they have from that. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I wanted to just kind of repeat this ASAP Rocky, who is a rapper, by the way. He's a rap artist. I just wanted to repeat the quote that he said, because it made me think a little bit. And he said, "To be able to have that comfort wearing something that's considered to be feminine, that shows masculinity to me." Now, I know that that's incorrect, because he's literally wearing something feminine to show his masculinity, which is, I don't even know what that would even mean. But it kind of led me down this path of thinking, well, then where is the line? Because not everybody is wearing something because that's feminine. Because it's feminine, they're wearing it. But for example, in high school growing up, people always used to say real men wear pink, stuff like that. So then I guess, where do we draw the line, especially in fashion that's always changing? Always, it seems to be subjective. Where do we draw the line then? Where, pink is for girls, blue is for boys. Like, where do we draw that line?
I mean, it's just what society says is a distinguishing marker. I mean, pink being for girls and blue being for boys, I think is somewhat arbitrary. There is some science to it, though. And I do believe I read a while ago about how it was switched, how a lot of boys a long time ago did wear pink, and then girls wore blue for a while, and then they switched it. But
yeah,
I saw some articles on that. I don't know if that has any credence or any kind of validity whatsoever. I just remember reading about that and just thinking that's interesting. But the point is that, you know, it could be seemingly arbitrary. The only thing I could think of that would maybe give credence to why blue boys should wear blue is because genetically more boys are colorblind than girls.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like 10% of boys are colorblind and only
Wow.
1% or less than 1% of girls are colorblind.
Mhm.
And if you're colorblind or if you're on some kind of spectrum of color blindness, then blue is the most outstanding color that you see.
I see.
That's why Facebook is blue, because Mark Zuckerberg is
Oh.
colorblind. So he made Facebook blue.
Is that
'cause-
true?
Yeah. What am I lying
Oh,
to you
no,
right now?
no. It was
You're
more
fact
like
checking of
No,
all the things
no,
that I
I'm
just said.
not.
You're gonna fact check the
No, I'm not
Facebook one.
fact checking you. I'm just exclaiming like, wow, that kind of thing. Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, that's why Facebook is blue.
Yeah.
It's the color that stands out to him the most. Those are things like I can see why we could do that, and that's fine with me. But
Yeah.
the whole point is there is a distinguishing marker.
Mhm.
So why are we trying to blur it now? The reason why we're trying to blur it has a lot to do with us changing definitions, just like you quoted ASAP Rocky about masculine being feminine, and
Yeah.
feminine being masculine.
Yeah.
When hot means cold, and cold means hot. Nothing
Yeah.
means anything anymore. And so boy means girl, girl means boy. And that's the whole point of this whole T revolution.
Mhm.
And so far, the T's are triumphing and succeeding in the revolution to
Yeah.
confuse language. Because if you don't say hot is cold anymore, it's because you're a bigot, you're
Yep.
racist, you're a transphobe, or something like that. So
Yep,
now
yep.
you have to say hot is cold and cold is hot. It's whatever you make it to mean.
On the flip side, like you were saying before, Al Mohler disagrees with this article, not only on the beliefs that the author may have or is proposing, but in the content itself. He says it's actually wrong what the author is saying. And I want to just read this quote before we move on to the next article. He writes, "Number one, maybe it does look like this in certain neighborhoods of New York City. Maybe it does look like this on the campus of certain American universities. Maybe it does look this way in certain kinds of communities on the East and West Coast. And maybe there are exceptions at points in between. But when it comes to this as a cultural norm, I don't think so. And that just points to the fact that maybe the fashion writers at the New York Times really aren't telling us much about fashions for most of the country. But the second thing is this kind of article is not just about what supposedly is seen, but what we should wish to see or what we should wish for to see, what we should hope for as we think about the future. This is clearly a statement that it would be cultural progress if we did have waning gender dress codes," which is exactly what you were saying. This is an article not accurately representing what is currently happening all over the country, but it's more of an ideal of what should be happening or what could be happening if we bought into this idea. Like you were saying, and like Al Mohler says, not only are we seeing people dress like this, but people are being more and more brainwashed to believe that a culture that supports cross-dressing is a progressive one, is a good one, is a liberating one. And so I wanted to move on to our next article talking about brainwashing. With the title, "Yes, Kink Belongs at Pride and I Want My Kids to See It," there was a Washington Post op-ed article arguing that kink should remain at LGBTQ pride parades. And what is kink, you may ask? The author's family was marching at a pride parade in Philadelphia when her child, who was in elementary school, pointed to a float that was coming along with a quote-unquote bare-chested man whose black suspenders clipped into a leather thong paused to be spanked playfully by a partner with a flog. And the kid asked the mom what they were doing, as other paraders came with whips and batons, some leading their companions by leashes. And, in the article, she admits that her kids were too young to understand the nuance of the situation, but she told them, quote unquote, the truth, that these folks were members of our community celebrating who they are and what they like to do. Granted that this family, they were part of the LGBTQ community, she was telling her kids that they're celebrating who they are and what they like to do. And she disagrees that children need to be shielded from such sexualized displays and that the participants in these parades should be free to express themselves. Needless to say, there was a lot of backlash against this article. And kids are being more and more exposed to these types of things even with that Netflix show, I think, or movie Cuties. even with stuff like that, it's just the world is moving in a direction that is polluting the purity of children. And so I guess the question is, we have parents in our church, and this is becoming extremely prevalent where teachings about LGBTQ are just being spread even in schools. So, how should we be educating our kids about the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, that parent should go straight to jail.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's pretty bad. Um, but so okay, I didn't want to read this, but I'll just read this quote too from this article. Um, but she writes, anti-kink advocates tend to manipulate language about safety and privacy by asserting that attendees are non-consensually exposed to overt displays of sexuality. The most outrageous claim is that innocent bystanders are forced to participate in kink simply by sharing space with the kink community, as if the presence of kink at Pride is a perverse exhibition that kinksters pursue for their own gratification. But kinksters at Pride are not engaged in sex acts, and we cannot confuse their self expression with obscenity.
Yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with that. I mean, there's so many things to tackle because she's purporting so many of these new, I don't know if it's new, but these ideologies that are all backwards. First, she mentioned consent. So
Yeah.
we have now elevated consent as the highest good.
Yep.
So once there's consent, it's all good. This is absolutely not true. Consent doesn't make anything right. It's what God dictates is
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
So what God dictates as right is righteous. So if you live by his mandates, that's what's considered righteous. It's because we could not live by his dictates that we are unrighteous, fallen, sinful, enemies of God. That's why we needed a righteous savior.
Right.
And so when we start confusing all this terminology and we bring up consent to the highest level of, good, now we have completely perverted what is good and what is right or what is just and what is evil
Mhm.
by doing things like this. And so this is their worldview. They think that, consent is the highest good. So as long as there's consent, we should support or cheer
Yeah.
them on or things
Yeah.
like that. So, and then if you don't, then especially something like kink or something like sexual perversion is what we normally, so another changing of language is instead of calling a sexual perversion, now it's called kink. But these are things that we're exposing to our kids to not just brainwash them, but to expose them to sexual immorality at a young age
Yep.
so that we destroy their innocence.
Yep.
It has always been in history where we protect our kids from this kind of exposure until they're ready. This is just normal parenting or normal teaching.
Yeah.
You don't give your kid like a hammer until they're ready to wield it.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I know 2-year-olds that can wield a hammer, but parents don't give that 2-year-old a hammer because they will hit someone else with the hammer.
Yep.
So that's why they have practice hammers like, I don't know, plastic hammers, whatever it is. But then the parents need to teach them how to use the hammer properly.
Right.
This
Right.
is just
Right.
basic stuff. This is like basic foundational stuff. This is not even wisdom. This is so basic. But because we have abandoned godly wisdom, we want to abandon it to the ultimate extreme. And so that's why we're here where we are, where
Mhm.
we even take sexual perversion, call it by another name, and then say we need to celebrate it. And that's the third thing I'll mention just about this. Maybe you can add is every kind of perversion in the LGBTQ, that array of letters, there needs to be a celebration. It's not just let us just live this way because this is our, natural inclination. It is our, where we are attracted, this is our orientation, whatever language you want to use, but
Yeah.
it's not like that. And so maybe they argued that in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s and 90s, but now it's you have to celebrate
Yep.
or we will punish you for not celebrating what we deem is right
Yep.
and good. So by elevating, even consent, what they're saying is now I can elevate above anything else what I deem to be right. That's why they're continuing to sue that Christian baker over and over again
In Colorado, right?
in Colorado until he has nothing left until he closes down his business. That's the goal. That's what the guy that's suing him now, and who won the case, by the way, in the Colorado courts, is a lawyer who said, "I want you to make a trans cake for me, and if you don't, I will sue you." I don't even know if the lawyer is trans.
Yeah.
This is like a transitioning cake or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole point is I'm going to force you to celebrate. So what this whole LGBTQ plus movement is doing is they're taking everything celebratory of what we thought was purity, what was good, and now they're going to take that for their own agenda,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we had marriage ceremonies where we had flowers, cakes, we had the whole ceremony, but they want to take that for themselves. So it's not about just let us live the way we can live because freedom, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people used to rage against the slippery slope argument, but it's a slippery slope, and now it's an avalanche. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rough. I mean, even reading this article, it's pretty angering. What's the word? It's pretty
Angry.
it's pretty infuriating. It's but it also made me think, like, dang, if a parent like this is teaching her kids in this way, it made me think, how should our parents be teaching our kids? How should we be correctly teaching about the LGBTQ community in a way where our kids don't hate the LGBTQ community or consider them dirty or consider them just, I don't know, just completely other? How do we accurately and correctly and biblically teach our kids about the LGBTQ community?
Well, I mean, I think first you need to teach sin and the gospel. That's what you need to teach.
Mhm.
Because if we continue to try to teach from this standpoint, epistemological view where, we need to listen to every voice and things like that, that's where we'll start getting hung up on, oh, we got to hear this, we got to hear that, we got to hear this. There's one standpoint that matters, and that's God's.
Mm-hmm.
So if we teach them the gospel rightly, we'll know how to love rightly. If we teach them the gospel rightly, they'll know how to treat others, because the gospel teaches us what it means to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
What it means to love the other disciples as Jesus loved them, that kind of thing. And so these are things that we want to continue to teach, which I am encouraged by in our church. We have young kids who are praying gospel-centric prayers at the age of like 6, or 7, which is so encouraging. And so we want to continue to teach that to our kids, to show them what's right and wrong. Because if you know what's right and wrong, we could teach them about what love is. And so I think that's one.
Is there a 2?
I don't know. So you have a response?
No, I have no response. I mean,
we gotta teach them how to. Number 2, which is what I'm hoping you would say, but we gotta tell them to stand up to defend the gospel.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what you're doing. This is a part of your job and ministry here in our church, is to teach our kids to not only know what the gospel is, but to defend the truth. And if you know how to defend the truth, then you're not going to give in to or be swayed by these other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, just catechizing a kid, I don't know if that's enough, because you got to teach them how to apply it. You got to show them what the defense is, why this catechism was made. Otherwise, they're just going to memorize a bunch of words and not know the meaning behind it. You know why these guys can continue to sue that Christian baker? Because they have money. Who's giving them the money? It's places like the people that we support, who keep on waving this pride flag, and then every purchase you make, like a certain portion goes into this organization. Well, let's just be specific. So Burger King came out,
yes,
right? And then they said something. They try to throw shade at
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A, saying their places are open on Sundays, and every chicken sandwich that is bought in Burger King, they're going to donate, what is it, like 40 cents of every dollar to
something,
HRC?
Some percentage.
So, yeah, some percentage to HRC. If you don't know HRC, you can look it up. HRC is like one of the worst places that you can give to. This is a terrible, terrible organization. And it's this so the Human Rights Campaign, is will go through and try to cancel every organization that is within their power and close them down because they're a political lobbying group with threats, with cancel culture, whatever it is, and they're going to use that. They have a ton of money because people keep on giving to them. Every time you buy from like Nike, they give money to places like this, and they give money to China. I mean, you have to know where you're giving money to. And so the response that I get is, what place doesn't give to these organizations? And I go, that's my point. So we're essentially funding our own demise.
Yep.
We have to stand up sometime. So I guess if you say what organization, if you're gonna go after Burger King and you're like, I love Whoppers, whatever it is, right? And you love Nike shoes, right? Things like that. And I guess, and you like, what organization doesn't give to these, these places? Then I guess my response is, up to what point are you going to support them until you stop? Then what's gonna say, you know what, I'm gonna give to them as little as I possibly can. Then, if I have to make a conscious decision between buying a pair of shoes from this place and buying a pair of shoes from another place, which I don't know that much about, and then you start going to make those conscious decisions. If I have to buy a chicken sandwich from Burger King or Chick-fil-A, to me, that's a no-brainer anyway, because Chick-fil-A's sandwiches are superior.
It's true.
I don't think that's debatable. I just think that's
I don't
fact.
think that's even up for debate.
Yeah. Burger King's just throwing shade, and they're getting stomped on anyway. But anyway, but that's what it is. Like, if you know where this money is going toward, why would you give money to them? So if they secretly do it, that's one thing. But they've openly put it on their Twitter account that they're going to give money to HRC.
Yeah.
How can you support that? How can you buy even one chicken sandwich after knowing that? I can't. That's my point. So if you're saying, oh, then you can't do anything in this world, I was like, all right, fine. We can say, we're not going to judge people. We're not going to go into this legalistic route where we're going to find out everything, every single penny that this organization will do. But can we at least say, if they openly say they're going to support something that is anti-Christian, that goes after Christian organizations to shut them down, can we say at least we're not going to give money to them? Can we even at least say that? So we're, like, people don't want to draw any line, I think it's because of fear. You want to buy any Whopper you want, and you want to buy any kind of pair of shoes that you want. That's why these companies aren't budging. Because you know who will draw those lines? It's the LGBTQ community. They'll draw those lines.
That's true.
They'll give money to places like this, and they'll not give money to places that won't support them. So guess where, like, big secular companies will go to then? They'll go to the people who will threaten them, not the people who are going to buy their stuff anyway. And so, you have to be careful where you give money. I don't want you to spend like every single waking moment thinking about it, but if it's blatantly out there in public, why are you doing this? Why are you even buying a Whopper? That would be my contention.
Recently, the NFL, they had they shared a video on Twitter where they had football is ... followed by changing words. So the first one was football is gay. This was in their video that they shared. Football is gay. Football is lesbian. Football is beautiful, queer, life, exciting, culture, transgender, heart, power, tough, bisexual, strong, freedom, American, accepting, everything for everyone. That's what it said. And then followed by the fact that they'll be supporting the Trevor Project. I mean, first and foremost, they're equating the LGBTQ community to words such as life, exciting, heart, power, tough, strong, freedom, American, accepting, everything for everyone. Right? By doing that, they're saying that gay, lesbian, queer, transgender, all these words equate with these other positive words that are known to be positive. And I had a quick question regarding the Trevor Project. And the Trevor Project is an LGBTQ youth suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization. And, it made me think, for the sake of the youth that are in this situation that may be suicidal, even though this Trevor Project is teaching them the wrong ideas of sexuality and of identity and security, of loving yourself, can Christians in good conscience support projects like this, or companies, organizations like this?
So, what was even just a few years ago called gender dysphoria, now we're trying to say this is a normal thing to go through. Um, gender transitory feelings. I don't know, like things where you feel like you're the other gender. It's normal and we should let you go through with it and things like that. And
Yeah.
people who have gender dysphoria are many times, if not most of the time, suicidal. It's because they're really unhappy with their body.
Yeah.
And they believe that changing that body then would make them less suicidal. There's no scientific evidence to back this, by the way. And so even people who transition, that means they actually have a physical and biological sex change, that the suicide rate does not go down. That means their suicidal tendencies do not change on the whole. There is no scientific evidence, statistic, study done that would support anybody changing their gender physically, especially at such a young age. In fact, there was a hashtag that should have trended, but I believe it was suppressed. I think it's called shadow banned in Twitter, where people were posting up their detransitions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you and I, we know about this, but people were detransitioning from their T-ness, right?
Yeah.
And they would post up how they were born a girl and they wanted to be a guy, and they transitioned, and then they were even more unhappy, so they transitioned back to a girl, and they couldn't be happier. People who even had mastectomies, which is the removal of their breasts, they would change back to a woman after and still be happier. And I find that incredibly sad, because who let these young children make such a huge decision at that young of an age? I think the parents should be culpable for this. They're responsible for this insanity. But it's like these parents are pushing it, like the Washington Post article that you read. And so it's quite sad. So I don't think that if you don't have the right, I guess, just basic foundational knowledge between what a guy and a girl is, how are you going to help prevent suicide? There are better organizations out there. I wouldn't support anything that stands by some kind of LGBTQ agenda and worldview, thinking that they can help in any way some kind of crisis.
So I guess the question then is, and I think this is a question that we've asked multiple times on this podcast, is if it's helpful, do the ends justify the means? And, I was looking at their website, and they state a quote that says LGBTQ youth who report having at least one accepting adult were 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year. So having one accepting adult that accepts them for who they are reduce their risk of suicide by 40%. And, they have training modules, online training things that you could go through. There's one called CARE, which is an acronym for Connect, Accept, Respond, Empower. And it helps adults understand the situation. So understand risk factors, warning signs of suicide, the challenges that youth in the LGBTQ community face, how to respond to a youth who's at risk for suicide. And not only that, but to create environments that decrease the risk of suicide. So it seems like, and I know what you answered may be, contrary to what I'm asking again, but this organization may seem like it saves lives. They're doing it the wrong way. But something like suicide, which is so, I guess, urgent, could Christians support organizations like this, helping those who are suicidal because it's so urgent?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean it to be so pithy or so short or dismissive of a current, urgent, dire need.
Yeah.
The same could be said for kids who need a parent, kids in the whole foster care cycle, or kids who are up for adoption. Could we give them to I think we talked about it before, a gay couple
Yeah.
or lesbian
We
couple,
talked
right?
about yeah.
And so wouldn't that alleviate the immediate need for,
Right.
this kid who is desperate?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why some so-called Christian agencies like Bethany are caving into this or placating to this, saying that because of the need, they're going to do this. Ultimately, we know it's not good for the kid.
Yeah.
What you might think is urgent will still kill them. It won't do any good, and in the end also destroy society. I mean, what we're really going for here? Are we trying to do the right thing, saying this is going to be good immediately and it will be lasting? So shouldn't we push for those things that are good right now and lasting?
Yeah.
Rather than saying, can we do this as another option? It's like, why would you do that as another option if there are other things that are helpful?
Right.
So there are other agencies, Christian agencies, that you could go to. You could go to your local church,
Yeah.
and then find help there. But apparently now we've tried so hard in our society to delegitimize churches
Mm-hmm.
and all its community services. People don't want churches' help because the help of the churches, because they could easily do it from organizations like this, which is completely anti-Bible. And so they want to continue to rage against God, like it says in Psalms 2.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, whose destruction is it for? It will destroy the child, and it will destroy the community that continues to support this kind of worldview. So I'm not saying it's easy. It's going to be tough. And there are going to be people who will get hurt. We can't save everybody. I don't think but I don't think organizations like this could even save anybody anyway.
Yeah.
So, outside of what the Bible is teaching, what can we possibly do?
You talked about the church, which is kind of where I wanted to go with this question as well. It's not like the LGBTQ youth who have suicidal thoughts are pouring into the church. As a matter of fact, they may even believe that the church hates them or the church is the enemy. They wouldn't come near the church. So then the question is, what can we do? What can we do as the church? How can we help those who are in this type of situation? Because it seems like all these non-Christian organizations are helping them. But what can we, the church, do in the right way immediately?
I think we got to go down to the basics again. You got to teach the Bible rightly.
Mm-hmm.
The preacher needs to exegete correctly. When we have bad exegesis, when we have bad worship, that's when we see the communities fall apart. We hear wrong exegesis of all these stories, and so we live wrongly too. Like, first, I don't know, as an example, what's the Good Samaritan about? It's a very familiar parable, right?
Yeah.
But people take the Good Samaritan parable and then they try to equate it with, this is why you can't be racist, or this is about social justice. You got to help the poor. You got to help those. It's not. That's bad exegesis. That's where you do eisegesis. It's about the love that you're supposed to have for others, but that you're incapable of. But Christ does it for us. And so now through Christ's love, we can do it. So Christ never, ever throws away the law. He says he fulfills it. And so we see here people doing the opposite. People throwing away the law because we think that's love. That's not love. So a lot of bad eisegesis, exegesis will, kind of play out in your life too. I hope churches really understand that worship is central. Gathering, the gathering of the saints is central to society and as a whole, and that people can learn rightly. And then from there on, we see that the church has always dealt with the needs of society. I think it's also because the church has become so weak that, the world doesn't think they need us anymore. But Jesus calls us specifically the salt and light of the world.
Yeah.
The world does need us. And that's why we ought to do what is good and what is right. Don't placate to, the world's ideologies. Don't give in and compromise to their own standards. We don't live by their standards. We live by God's.
You talked about love, and I think there is a common misconception, a common belief that loving the LGBTQ plus community is supporting them, is agreeing to and celebrating what is leading them down a sinful path. How do we correctly, biblically, practically, immediately love the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, I think this is what the SBC and the PCA, they're all kind of facing these questions. Because we've placated to definitions and societal norms, it has become much more difficult. Instead of saying everybody is a sinner, everybody needs the gospel, we're saying, how can we preach the gospel a little bit differently? How can we shape the gospel a little bit differently to kind of customize it for this people group and this orientation?
Yeah.
I think that has done huge detriment and harm to the church's witness. We don't do that. We preach the gospel. You're a sinner because you have, disobeyed the commandments of God. You have received this fallen nature that has been given to us by Adam, our first father. And now we need a savior.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have a savior, he doesn't only justify us, he leads us into sanctification, where we grow more in likeness with him. He is the ultimate righteous one that we are now following once we become justified, once we are saved in Christ. And so we love people by preaching the gospel and living rightly, by sharing the good news that we have first and foremost. And then these other things naturally follow. If I'm going to share with you the most precious thing that I have, I naturally want to share other things with you. And this is what we see happen in the first church, in the first century church.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that when the first century church didn't do that is when Paul starts saying, what are you doing? You're supposed to do this. And so they're corrected. And so hopefully we see that here in our church as well. And I mean, you could also say that even if you don't get the recognition that you desire, even if we are canceled 100 times over, even if people go as far as to persecute, kill, jail, murder Christians, the church has never stopped, is the point. We continue to do the things that we ought to. And that is our history. That is what we have always stood for. This is why we don't placate or give into these worldly ideologies. And that's all these other companies are doing. You can be mad at Burger King and Nike all you want. They're not doing it because they really believe in it. They're patronizing the community that will give them money. And so, you just got to be wise about it too. So in our society, I hope that we understand Jesus is the one that commands us to be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. Please don't give up your purity. Be innocent as doves. Stay with the biblical norms that God has given us. And don't be an idiot. I mean, don't give in to the worldly ideologies. Be wise as serpents. And this is what Jesus commands his disciples to be. And that's why we continue to study the Bible. We continue to gather to pray, to worship God, and we grow in that sanctification that way.
Thank you for that. We have to continue to pray for the world that we live in and the church, like you said, to be faithful as his witnesses here on this earth till his return. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we will be continuing to talk about current events that are happening. So this is where the fun begins. Whatever happens in our country, that's what we'll talk about. It's like a secret menu type of thing. Hidden menu at In-N-Out, Jamba Juice, that kind of thing. So it's like a surprise episode, like a booyah. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. As always, and until the end of time, we love you. We miss you. Bye.